Yeah. So going back into James's point is that this one individual, he came back into our practice after going playing college football, and we have very little um, block practice at all.
Okay.
And we put him out, and he struggled like a little bit, obviously, but he was able to hit a 15 meter spin pass without ever training it.
Wow.
So we have to, and it led to a score as well, like in our key like zone that we were rewarding them for getting into. So I think we need to start being a little bit more critical of block practice or repetition based methods and give a little bit more credit to the self organization of individuals versus taking our uni backgrounds and just saying, hey, we know this works for this amount of time, and as long as we hit these repetitions, it's going to work. Where we could probably be slowing down the development of those individuals by implementing that practice specifically.
And I guess what you've just spoken about there kind of leads on to our next 2 points, i.e., is there initial struggle for coaches to give away that power for sort of that player-led approach? And secondly, are players comfortable with that initial responsibility? Do you guys have any thoughts or experiences with those sort of situations?
I think there's again, you're looking at kind of coach and athlete resistance in that kind of that change of coaching practice and looking at going towards their more empowering practices. And I think, it does exist, and some athletes take to it better than others, and some coaches take to it better than others as well. I think the importance around it is, more precisely, what we're focused on now is the potential solutions to it if we think it's the right thing, the appropriate thing. And I think lots of players, for a lot of players from my experiences, it's about taking time for them to understand actually why we might be doing something. And it's that kind of I've had a couple of players, they might say, oh no, I do trust you, coach, I'm just not sure about it. And I'm like, okay, well, it's not about like a trust thing. This is like the process we want to go through and why we might be changing it. And then once they start to understand, because quite often these athlete in more empowering practices and stuff, well, it's all for the athlete's development. That's what drives the practice. So I think just getting the understanding to that helps. But I think going to that point around the initial struggle to give over the power of the player kind of ties into what we've talked about earlier on about what makes a good coach. If you're a coach who struggles to give over the power to the player, well, maybe it doesn't. That maybe just emphasize that your views are maybe quite, you're kind of like a sole leader, and actually, are you viewing yourself as not more important, but actually how are you viewing yourself in relation to your role as a coach? Because if it's appropriate to go with a coaching style or practice style that's going to empower athletes and you're going to act as a facilitator, but you're worried about, I don't know, Toby's mum and dad on the sideline who are thinking, oh, the coach isn't saying anything, is he actually coaching? Then actually what are your perceptions of your role? And maybe there needs to be some work with coaches around what do they want to achieve and what are they trying to set out, and then perhaps they'll find that struggle easier.
Yeah, I think for me, and this goes way back to episode 1, James, when we were talking about our sort of journey through coaching. I think whenever I particularly come into a new environment, my initial process is to understand the players, not only who they are as people, but what they like as players. What does training look like? And that obviously requires you to, as you've spoken about there, watch and observe. And I kind of hope that with that, it's a two-way thing there, is that I'm not only taking the time to watch, observe, see what needs to be done that I can then implement something, but hopefully the players are getting that sense of, okay, James is here to support us, and etc. And we are, hopefully that's developing their comfort with the responsibility to go out and play as they see fit. And as you said, James, it's that role as a coach. We're there to guide our players through that.
Yeah,
I mean,
and we had Grant on, didn't we, a couple weeks ago, and Grant was saying, look, young coaches, they need to be like, talking about coaching to survive, actually, and it's almost like young coaches who maybe have, like, I don't know, an assessment or a mentor, and they get watched, and they start, their priorities and their thinking starts changing.
Yeah,
and that would obviously hamper or harm their focus in, facilitating these more kind of athlete empowerment sessions as well.
DJ, what are your sort of views or experiences with those sort of 2 points?
So for me, it really goes back into what coaches believe adaptation is.
Right.
And with adaptation, if you're looking at it from a biological standpoint, it's just a change by which that organism becomes better suited to its environment. And that will be dictated by the knowledge of that coach. And the biggest thing as coaches that I think we need to start moving towards is not necessarily telling them that we need to do these steps to achieve a goal.
Right.
Is to imprint our knowledge that is objective into their brains and put them in open learning environments in which that they can start to sort out it within themselves and with their teammates. Because the biggest problem that we all struggle with as coaches is not letting things get too sloppy or get too far outside of the bandwidth in which we believe that they should play. But if they come up with a solution that is better or is unanticipated by us that still leads to a successful result, we can't hamper that, because we want to have players to be creative, self-organizing, and give us input back as coaches. But if we're not okay with expanding outside of like our own little bandwidth of how we feel that we should play, then it'll never be actualized. So because we can talk about athlete-centered and athlete or player-centered approaches and holistic programming and all that fun stuff, but if we're just violating the principle by putting them in a box, then there's no point of even having that system in place in the first place. That's my personal opinion on it. And when you're looking at the time constraints that even go into that as well, we used to have 2-hour practices for us on every Tuesday and Thursday. And when we found we actually led to a pure athlete-centered approach, our practices, we were getting everything done within 60 and 75 minutes. So why do we need to take that allotted time and keep sucking air out of our sessions like we discussed before?
Yeah.
Just to validate our own self-worth. Because at the end of the day, we're all going to know who the best coach is because it's going to show up on match day. And if you're not diligent in your planning and letting them be stretched and letting it get messy, then you're not going to have optimal performance. Because you can build and find players through your training, through recruitment and all that fun stuff. But if you're not giving them the skills to actualize those talents on match day, then you're just missing the whole point.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. I think, through my 8 years of coaching, and it's something that's probably only come to me in the last couple, is you need to be more reflective of your own performance. We talk to players, you need to reflect on your performance, look at your strengths and weaknesses, and I think how many times do we as coaches do that? And I think definitely when I've looked back at my practice, I think definitely I've probably done sessions where there's been 20 minutes that's just been pointless practice. And as you said there, DJ, it's just validating. Have those 20 minutes just been, me trying to validate my worth as a coach, and how could those 20 minutes have been spent better? Could the players have had a little bit more time for, I don't know, just be together, to have discussions, to have a chat at the side of the pitch, or go home, or whatever it may be. And I guess this comes back to, I think the hardest thing actual coaching is, how do we make each session as effective and as efficient as possible? And that big word that we've used this week it's that adaptability, isn't it, fellas? I think everybody's striving to be as a coach. I think definitely these discussions and these chats, I know for me, it's made me think a lot more about how I coach and how I can develop as a coach.
Yeah, like what's James, like what's your thoughts on adaptability, and what does that mean for coaching practice?
Which one?
Yeah,
That's it.
Yeah.
that's the issue. I think we touched on it earlier and delved deeper into it, and it kind of, for me, it just ties around a coach being adaptable with their coaching practice. Just means that not only can a coach, and it's something we all kind of should be striving to do, not only can a coach recognise, what might a team or an individual need or want, and appreciates a way of doing this, but being effective in selecting the most appropriate and effective way of doing that. So, and that's a combination of things. That's a combination of I'm not just saying what might be the most effective way of getting them to straight away achieve this thing that you're setting out to do, because also, how might you include and incorporate fun, enjoyment, longevity of the success. So, doing it in a way that they're going to remember and understand it. Like, hey, the amount of times, especially it still happens now sometimes, but when I was younger, I'd coach. We're like, oh, okay, right, we need to improve this week. I don't know, let's say rucking. We're going to go work on our two-man clear-outs, and we do it. Come back next week, the following week, having done it before and kind of been forgotten. And again, and then that starts to tie into as well. They're more measures of effectiveness of the coaching practice as well. And I think the coach who can adapt and be adaptable with that to be as effective as possible in the specific context they're in. I think that's kind of what the maximal adaptability is, and that's it's a really hard thing to strive for. But it's why you keep learning and upskilling and trying to strive towards that, because to me, that seems what like the most adaptable coaching would be in that sense.
And for both of you, what have you kind of framed around, like in your practices, that increases intention of the movement or skill or the tech that you're trying to implement versus just having them do it? Because that's something that I've learned through S&C like quite a bit, is that, well, just general movement skills, that the intention behind the movement is actually more important than the constraint that is being applied to it. So I just want to know your guys' thoughts on that.
In what way? Is that looking at a specific skill and how you can improve that, or?
Yeah, specific skill.
Okay. I mean, for me, I think too many coaches have in this mind a perfect way to do a skill. And, we'll take the spin pass, as we've spoken about this previously, this elbow up approach, this, hands facing target. And I think for me, I was so hell bent on players, you need to have the the elbow out. You need to be pushing across the shelf. You need to be facing target and way of passing. And the amount of there are certainly some players that do that, but there are also players that don't need to raise their hands. The ball just gets there. And I think for me, I was too focused on the actual technique rather than the result of that technique. And what I've learned to do, that if you're doing a structured drill where you're walking players through exactly what they need to do in order to execute that skill, you're just developing robots that are just going to do it that way. And this goes to this whole, practice approaches can look messy. I think a lot of coaches, and I was one of these coaches, that you set up this perfect drill where every player is going through a skill and a technique exactly as you told them, and you think, great, that makes me a brilliant coach because it looks clean and every player's doing it. When actually, when it comes to that chaotic game environment, they can't do that because, well, the situation might not allow them to do that. And it's this whole adage of, well, maybe I don't have time to bring my elbow up. Maybe the best way I pass isn't bringing that elbow up. And I think it's that whole concept of understanding your players, understanding their needs, and understanding that, like coaches, all players are different and they're going to find different ways to do certain things that DJ you've alluded to. There isn't one way to do everything. And as coaches, we need to understand that we might think one way is the best, but actually what we think and what a player thinks are two different things. And I think games is a great place to bring that to the forefront of different ways to do different skills. So yeah, sort of in a roundabout way, I think games are a great way to unlock that there are a number of different ways to execute a particular skill that a drill potentially doesn't allow for.
Yeah, I think just kind of similarly adding to that as well, sort of you as a coach, when it comes to skills, and some skills perhaps require slightly different approaches, but in the general, I'd say kind of what do you class as success of the skill? And if a player is consistently meeting that, then a good coach, it doesn't matter how they're doing it, you can start to work with them to identify how they're personally doing it and pick up ways of development for that. It's obviously skill correction, etc. is perhaps a bit more simple because you can start to maybe notice things easier. But again, it's about that, the appreciation, the learning you can from, players can pass the ball in different ways, like James explained. And, if you can decipher what works for them and how that ticks, and then hone in on developing that further for them rather than just teaching them what you believe is the way, then I think that makes sense of the way to do it, because, ultimately what is success of the skill? And if they're meeting success of the skill, then you can just start to maybe help just develop them that way further rather than changing things. And obviously, and then if skill success, in your opinion as a coach, isn't as high or where you'd want it to be, then again, it's about that's the specificness and then the details around why that might be. And it might be in lots of cases that you think, you can help alter a player's execution in the process, and that kind of changes the outcome. But in some other ways, it might be actually you start to appreciate they might have a slightly unorthodox way of doing something, but actually that can still work. And you often learn that from other players who do unorthodox things in a successful way.
Yeah, and I think you just pointed on that perfectly, because a lot of people aren't familiar with a lot of Franz Bosch's work. But we have this thing we have KP versus KR. So KP would be knowledge of performance versus KR, which is knowledge of result. And I think with the games, right, we can get the knowledge of result and that immediate feedback in. And for some of the smaller details, like for working line out, scrum, all of that stuff, that's where the knowledge of performance comes in. That's very analytical. And it just needs to be, as you stated, a slight balance that comes into that. And knowledge of result typically does drive performance a little bit more because it's very objective, it's finite. It's either you score or you don't. Where that performance is where we're trying to teach from the technical aspect. So say like in a scrum, right? If we're engaging and the other guy's trying to purposely collapse it with a short or a long bind, how can we change our technique to get the result that we're looking for? And I think that's the balance that James Hall himself is talking about with the whole part whole approach. I'm obviously a little bit more chaotic in mine, but we still need to have some resemblance of balance because we need to shift from chaos to organization in an effective manner. And the best teams do that. And you can watch that every single Saturday or Sunday. The teams that know how to wave from chaos into organization with the shortest time frame are the ones that are most successful on game day.
I agree. Anything else to add, fellas? Or James, do you want to round us up there?
Well, thank you. Good to be back on and chatting. And I think this is built on and progressed on nicely from the part one that you guys put out last week. And I think again, it's just a key kind of takeaway from it is around, again, we've talked a lot around that adaptability and what we believe is kind of that effectiveness behind it all. And I think the more we can be self-reflective on that and critical of ourselves on that, the better we can get at, succeeding in those things and developing as coaches. And I think, the way we've talked through our journeys and our learnings from our journeys and what you guys discussed last week is almost starting to align with lots of what we've discussed today in terms of looking at the details, and lots of changes we've made on our journey has been due to our reflections and our learnings of around some of the key points we've talked about, you guys talked about last week and we've talked about in this one as well. So I think we've covered an awful lot, which is great. And I guess the only other thing I really say is obviously massive thanks to DJ for coming on and coming back despite having to talk to James by himself for about an hour and a half last week.
I know.
Yeah, right.
That was great, DJ. Don't laugh. You loved it.
It was good.
Yeah, good. So all good my end, and then we shall see where this takes us next. As always, we're constantly looking to share the learning, share the experiences, and please put this out wherever you see fit, and get in touch with us with anything you might want to come on and discuss, or anything you'd like to hear about, and we can do our best and we can line up guests that we feel might be appropriate to do that as well. And we'll just keep this learning and developing going, because it's certainly proving an effective tool, or at least for me anyway. So
yeah, I'd just like to add to that, DJ, great to have you back, mate, and you're welcome back any time. And yes, guys, as key themes all
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, key themes always been, guys, we're all an open book here, so if you want to get involved in Plod, please get in touch, and we'll see you all next time.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
See you later, guys. Bye-bye.